I'll be honest, it's quite rare in this current age for me to be somewhat stunned when I see an article and the first thing I think is, wow, Alex Jones might have been right. Now I know what a number of you are thinking. Who's Alex Jones? Well, he's not totally irrelevant just yet. He still has quite a large presence on Gab and I believe BitChute. Now, obviously for this we're going to need some context. Well, for that we have this article by Vox, How Our Drinking Water Could Help Prevent Suicide, where some researchers think putting lithium in our water could save lives. And now to understand why I was thinking of Alex Jones, I'm going to play the relevant clip now.
And I'm not saying people didn't naturally have homosexual feelings. I'm not even getting into it, quite frankly. I mean, give me a break. You think I am like, oh, shocked by it, so I'm up here bashing it because I don't like gay people? I don't like them putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay. Do you understand that? Serious crap. I'm sick of being social engineered. It's not funny.
I love the remix version of that. A link to that will be in the description below. It is quite amusing. Now before we dive into the article by Vox, I do think there are a couple of things we need to cover when it comes to lithium. So first things first, this is what lithium looks like in its natural form. Well, okay, once it's been separated from rocks. It has 3 electrons, making it one of the most electropositive elements. Not the most electropositive, of course, you have to go further down the alkali metal column, but as it is an electropositive element, the 1 electron it has on the outside disappears quite quickly. Now, according to a US Geological Survey, there is enough lithium in the world to last just over 350 years in batteries, which works out to be 13.5 million metric tons. There are, of course, pros and cons to it, with some effects being noted as hypothyroidism, confusion, tachycardia or a slow heartbeat, heart arrhythmia, weight gain, increased thirst, the kind we need to drink, not the other kind, weak bowels, nausea, tremors, blurred vision, ringing in the ears, and a possible coma, with the benefits being, and the benefits the article will cover, neuroprotective and literally grows back brain cells, or new ones, protects your brain cells from toxins, infections and strokes, it helps boost your immune system, increases longevity, and protects the brain from Alzheimer's disease, although of course that's more of a claim and not entirely, yeah. So now that I've gotten all that out of my system, because, yeah, I like chemistry, let's go into the article and understand what they're trying to put forward. Lithium is a potent psychiatric drug, one of the primary prescribed medications for bipolar disorder, but it is also an element that occurs naturally all over the Earth's crust, which is not entirely true. You see, because it's an alkali metal and only has that 1 electron, it doesn't occur naturally in its natural form. It occurs as something else, which is why you will find it mixed in with rocks and brine. That means that small quantities of lithium wind up in the tap water you consume every day. Just how much is in the water varies quite a bit from place to place. We in the United Kingdom and of course the rest of EU don't have to worry about this so much because our water is heavily regulated. Rules set out in the EU's own environmental policy, which was recently updated in February of this year, 2018 that is, for those who are watching it in current year, and not future current year. So our water is heavily regulated, which is actually why 30 years ago when the EU introduced policies on ensuring that the quality of the water being consumed by Europe as a whole was to a standard that was way beyond what we could ourselves afford to maintain, which is why we privatized it. I thought I'd introduce the political part because the science bit might have been a bit boring, I know, with this voice. Naturally, that made researchers curious. Are places with more lithium in the water healthier mentally? Do places with more lithium have less depression or bipolar? Or, most importantly of all, fewer suicides? Earlier I mentioned some of the negatives to having lithium in your system. Of course, with a number of those cases, it would involve people either consuming a lot or being very sensitive to it as a treatment. A 2014 review of studies concluded that the answer was yes. 4 of 5 studies reviewed found that places with higher levels of trace lithium had lower suicide rates. I wonder if there was any other surveys that were done to confirm whether or not any of them had also suffered any other condition as a side effect or a consequence. Just because the suicide rate went down does not mean those same people were not affected by diarrhea, and Nasir something, the Tufts psychiatry professor who co-authored that review, argues that the effects are large. High lithium areas, he says, have suicide rates 50 to 60% lower than those of low lithium areas. And here I was thinking it was the soy areas we needed to worry about. Perhaps it's the soy we need to deal with. Maybe in those areas where soy is higher and lithium is lower, there might be a correlation. Hashtag death to the soy boy. Hashtag mostly soy thing. By the way, as an important little point to raise now, as important as it is that obviously this shows something quite useful when it comes to handling suicide, it is important to note an idea that is going to be mentioned would require quite a lot of lithium, and since it is not something that occurs naturally, it is not something we have an infinite amount of. In fact, it has been estimated how much we have, and I mentioned it earlier. To do what may be suggested in this article could not be something that could be sustainable for the long term in any case, and we would also have to do something to address the other health risks for introducing lithium to the water supply. Oh, spoilers. The article mentions that. We'll get to it soon enough though. In general, in the United States, lithium levels are much higher in the northeast and east coast, and very low in the mountain west, and suicide rates track that exactly. Much lower suicide rates in the northeast, and the highest rates of suicide are in the mountain west. And here I was thinking that perhaps it had something to do with the cultures in those environments, which you cannot deny are a key factor in how society progresses and how people feel in those cultures and societies, communities even. But I'm sure they didn't discard that as an important piece of information. You can't hedge a bet on a chemical. If you apply that 50 to 60% reduction to the US, where about 45,000 people total died by suicide in 2016, you get a total number of lives saved at around 22,500 to 22,000 a year. That's likely too high, since you can't reduce suicide rates in places that are already high lithium. Foreign's own back-of-the-envelope calculation is that we'd save 15,000 to 25,000. Any lives saved is good. I would be happy if the number was 1, but of course, I would want to save everyone, if we could, which is not something that can truly be attained. Unfortunate. Foreign and another of other eminent psychiatrists are making a pretty remarkable claim. They think we could save tens of thousands of lives a year with a very simple, low-cost intervention, putting small amounts of lithium, amounts likely too small to have a significant side effect, into our drinking water, the way we put fluoride in to protect our teeth, which in all honesty, I didn't actually know we did that. I knew we did it with toothpaste, and I certainly have toothpaste that has 2,800 parts per million. It's quite handy. Was it fluorine? No, it's fluoride. I know that in some areas there are higher levels of fluoride, because it is one of the most naturally occurring elements on the planet, and we have a lot of it. It's like 13th in a list of elements we have a lot of. In some areas where it is lower in the water supply, it is introduced. For those that don't know, by the way, fluoride is basically fluorine but with an additional electron, because fluorine is the most electronegative element in the periodic table, which means it usually steals the electron off hydrogen because it's a dick. One big anion dick. Now onto another really interesting question, and one I certainly want to ask you, the viewer. Considering the pros and cons, even though in this instance they're referring to low amounts being introduced to water like with fluoride, do you believe that they should introduce lithium to water supplies if there is a chance it could help reduce suicide rates? Based on the theory being put forward, that is. Of course, there is another way of looking at this. Do you think they should introduce chemicals to water in the first place? And let's not forget here, this man, Foreign, while he has put forward an idea with a study, there are plenty of studies out there that actually say that, and I will quote this, there is no significant indication of an association between increasing lithium exposure level and decreasing suicide rate. There are a mountain of lists of studies done on lithium. Some show that there are many studies that find positive effects, but there are as many of those that find there is no impact on suicide whatsoever. Without definitive, conclusive, actual proof of it, is it wise to introduce it as a, well, let's just do it anyway thing because maybe it works? If we're going to do that, then surely the way to tackle toxic masculinity would also be to introduce a hearty dose of soy. Now the Vox article continues with a subject on why this hasn't been tried, and it says, these recent studies have made me less confident in the link between lithium and lower suicide rates. than I was when I first encountered Foreign's research, but it is such a cheap intervention, and the odds of serious side effects sound low enough that it seems worth a try. At the very least, I'd love for some governments to conduct a real bona fide experiment on lithium. Maybe a state could randomly add it to some of its reservoirs, but not others, or conversely a high lithium state could try removing it from the water. I would point out, just because you've got 2 states and you've added it to some and not to the others doesn't mean it would work in the slightest. You'd have to have 2 states that had identical cultures, identical people for that matter, identical structures. So it wouldn't be wise to do it with one that is a red safe state and a blue safe state. I think politics probably plays a part in mentality after all. Not in that, oh, red's strong, they're not going to commit suicide. No, I mean in the sense that when you get so emotionally invested in politics, maybe that makes them the same. I think my point still stands. And as far as the idea of the government creating or funding a bona fide experiment on lithium, I think that's actually quite a good idea. But human testing like that would require a fair amount of approval, and I think the people should be allowed to decide if they are allowed to be tested on like guinea pigs. Most people don't want to do that, willingly anyway. Anyway, please let me know in the comments below what you think about the idea that has been put forward in this article. Also, can you tell me what your favourite element is, because I'm curious. Maybe I'll tell you what mine is one day, if I can remember it. I've got it written down in one of my maths books when I used to shit all over Schrödinger. Anyway, I hope everyone has a lovely Sunday, and thank you all for listening.
Oh, goddowns.
In your ass.
Imagine my shock